out there are going to feel like mine.
Cases of diphtheria among asylum seekers in a Kent migrant centre are thought to have risen. It's after a man at the Manchester Migrant Processing Centre is thought to have died from the disease. Concerns have been raised over the spread of the infection as people were moved from an overcrowded facility there to hotels around the country. The government is expected to announce tomorrow the number of infections has climbed to around 50. Greater Manchester Police say a man whose body was found covered in potentially hazardous substances was sprayed with acid. 38-year-old Liam Smith's body was found in the street in the Kilburn Drive area of Wigan on Thursday. He'd also been shot. The area was quickly cordoned off and residents who were feeling unwell at the time urged to contact authorities. A murder investigation is ongoing. Protests against COVID lockdown measures are continuing in China after 10 people died in a tower block fire in Urumqi. Demonstrators claim coronavirus measures, which have seen residents locked down for as long as 100 days, may have impeded their escape. Civil unrest has now spread to Shanghai and Beijing at a level unseen since President Xi Jinping took office, with chants calling for him to resign. Yesterday, China reported a record number of COVID cases for a third day in a row. The Met Police has said it's fully prepared for potential activist disruption in London ahead of Christmas. The force believes Just Stop Oil protesters are planning activity in the capital from tomorrow until the 14th of December. It said it has policing measures in place to respond to that disruption. The climate group has been using civil resistance as part of its campaign to stop future gas and oil projects, including holding up the M25. The Prince and Princess of Wales have paid tribute to rugby union great Doddy Weir, who died yesterday aged 52. In a tweet, the royal couple called the former Scotland international and British and Irish Lion a hero and inspiration. Weir, who'd suffered from motor neuron disease since 2016, used his profile to raise awareness of the condition and generate funds through his charity foundation. Paul Thompson, Director of Fundraising for My Name's Doddy, says his legacy is the fight against MND.
So the foundation's been focused on a world free of MND. That's the vision that we have, and that's the vision that he's set us, and it's the vision that he's left us. So until we make real progress and continue to make real progress for effective treatments for the condition, the work is still not done. So his legacy is the progress that we make against MND.
And the Queen Consort is to break with the time-old tradition of having ladies in waiting, opting for Queen's companions instead. Buckingham Palace has announced the names of the 6 women who will support Camilla in her official duties, in addition to her private and deputy private secretaries. It's believed the companions' work will be similar, but not as extensive as the late Queen's ladies in waiting. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Calvin.
Hello and welcome to Common Sense Crusade with me, Calvin Robinson. Thank you very much for joining me. Here is what's coming up this afternoon. London's Ukrainian Catholic Cathedral hosted its Red Wednesday Remembrance Service as hundreds stand in solidarity with the suffering people of Ukraine, raising awareness of the plight of persecuted Christians to governments and societies across the West. As Church of England vicars are told to avoid carol services on the day of the World Cup final, I'll be asking, what is the state religion, Christianity or football? And it's been a year since Barbados became a republic, and now it's pursuing damages for the sins of its colonial past. I'll be asking, should we pay reparations to former colonies? And of course, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or by tweeting @gbnews. Deus Vult. On the way home the other evening, I saw a very eerie poster on the tube saying, "When an abuser controls your finances, they control you." It's part of a Safe Spaces ad campaign raising awareness about economic abuse, which occurs in 95% of domestic abuse situations. It's an important conversation to be had. What really struck me, though, was how HSBC seemed to be foreshadowing our futures. The Bank of England says looking closely at whether we should introduce a central bank digital currency in the UK and how it might work if we did. The Bank of England previously told ministers to intervene on digital currency programming so that digital cash could be programmed to ensure it is only spent on essentials or goods which an employer or government deems to be sensible. Imagine a world where money is no longer printed, it's created on a computer. A computer which says where you can spend your money, what you can spend it on, and how much you can spend. A world where the Bank of England, and by extension the government, knows where you spend every single penny. That is a world without freedom. As my dear friend and colleague Neil Oliver says, freedom to transact trumps all others. I would argue we have been in an abusive relationship with our government for a number of years now. I think they took away our civil liberties, they locked us in our homes, and mandated some care home workers to participate in medical procedures. The government employs behavioural scientists to influence the opinions of the British public. The so-called Nudge Unit was established in the Cabinet Office in 2010 by David Cameron's government to apply behavioural science to public policy. I think there's a Nudge Unit plot to increase compliance, propagandising to increase the uptake of the jab. And the Nudge Unit is not a conspiracy theory, it is published government policy. Now imagine if a government could incentivise our behaviour by controlling our spending habits. It's a risk not worth taking. Less than 20% of all transactions in this country are made using cash. At the same time, bank branches are being closed down left, right and centre, often using the pandemic or lockdowns as an excuse. We've also seen a huge push towards digital transactions, with the cap on contactless payments increasing from £20 to £100 last year, and now MasterCard and Apple Pay are allowing contactless payments over that limit in certain shops across the UK. If we want to keep hold of tangible payment methods, we need to remember, use it or lose it. Cash is king. A service was held at the Ukrainian Catholic Cathedral in London this week to show solidarity with people of Ukraine. The Red Wednesday event takes place every year to raise awareness of the plight of persecuted Christians, but took on a special significance this year as it was the first since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The event also highlighted how Christians are persecuted in countries such as China, Pakistan and Burma. And to discuss this, I'm joined by the Right Reverend Kenneth Nowakowski, Bishop at the Ukrainian Cathedral, the Catholic Eparchy of the Holy Family in London. First of all, Bishop, thank you very much for joining us. Could you tell us exactly what Red Wednesday is and how you celebrated it this year?
Well, thank you very much for having me today. Red Wednesday is a very special initiative that was initiated by the organization Aid to the Church in Need in 2016, and it places special emphasis on bringing to light the plight of persecuted Christians throughout the world, but also in general, people who are persecuted for their religious beliefs. And this year, Aid to the Church in Need asked if they could hold this event at our cathedral in London, and we were very grateful to have that. So we started off with a Divine Liturgy, or Mass as sometimes it's referred to in the West, and I had the honor of having with me Archbishop John Wilson, and also one of the bishops of Catholic bishops of Nigeria, who had come to talk to us about the situation in his diocese, where on Pentecost Sunday, one of his churches was stormed and 41 people were killed that Sunday.
A persecution of Christianity is growing around the world, but also intolerance is growing at home. Are you seeing much of this in the Ukrainian communities?
Well, here in the United Kingdom, where we've received over 160,000 of people from Ukraine fleeing harm's way and being welcomed here in Great Britain, hearts and homes have been opened, and we've been very grateful to the people of the United Kingdom, especially here in Great Britain, for doing that and for offering this charity. We've also been able to establish a special Ukrainian Welcome Center at our cathedral that assists people who are looking how they can access the NHS, how they can get their children into school, jobs, this type of a thing. And we've been very grateful for the greater community for opening their hearts and their homes to us.
Right, because this will have been the first Red Wednesday service since the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. What significance has that had to play?
Well, 9 months ago was the full-scale invasion of Russia in Ukraine. And of course, Red Wednesday has shown how community can stand up and stand together with Ukraine for people who are persecuted, regardless of their religious faith or ethnic background. And Red Wednesday, I think, highlighted that. We had one of our guest speakers, Archbishop Angelos of the Coptic Orthodox Church here in Great Britain, and he spoke eloquently about what Red Wednesday signified. Of course, Red Wednesday, as you showed a photograph, our cathedral was lit up in red to show the blood of the martyrs, of the men and women who have died because of their faith.
But when we think of Christian martyrs, we tend to think of the church fathers, but people are still being martyred for the Christian faith today, aren't they? And obviously you've had many ecumenical relationships over the last few weeks, especially with Red Wednesday. From speaking with your contemporaries who are worshipping abroad, where is Christianity persecuted at the moment, and how does that manifest itself?
Well, we can see Christianity persecuted in many ways and in many forms. Of course, overtly in countries where Christianity is outlawed, but also where, wearing Christian symbols, such as yourself today, how do people react to you? How do people respond?
Well, it depends.
And I think that, we think of Christians being persecuted, especially in the Middle East, where the number of Christians has diminished, especially in countries like Israel, Egypt, Lebanon. People are leaving because of not feeling safe to be able to practice their religion openly.
So what is the future of Red Wednesday?
I think the future of Red Wednesday continues every year to help people, first of all, remind them to pray, to speak out, and to take action that can inform their neighbors, their governments, about the need to support and to assist those Christians and people of faith who are persecuted.
And if people are watching or listening to this today, how can they get involved in Red Wednesday and the projects around it and the charities around it?
Well, I think they certainly can access the site of Aid to the Church in Need, which founded this movement, worldwide, international movement. That would be certainly one of the best ways that I could think that people could become involved.
And of course, many Ukrainians will be displaced right now, and today is the first Sunday of Advent. What significance does that play in the run-up to Christmas for a lot of people?
Well, for us, it signifies a couple of things. Yesterday was the 90th anniversary or commemoration of the Great Famine Genocide in Ukraine, where over 4 million people lost their lives because they were being killed just because they were Ukrainian. And when we approach Advent on the Western calendar, for us, we're still 2 weeks away,
of course,
being on the Julian calendar. But it is a time for prayer, for acts of charity, and to be thankful for everything that we have here, and perhaps to share that with others.
We've got a brief moment if you'd like to give people a message of what Advent is all about, because every year we seem to forget that Advent isn't actually Christmas, it's a Lenten period in the lead-up. Could you share some words of wisdom on that for us?
Well, for us Eastern Christians, Advent begins on the Feast of St. Philip and is a time of prayer and fasting and almsgiving to prepare ourselves, our hearts, so that we can come to the cave, come to the place where the star is shown us. Advent is a journey, and we should take this journey seriously and prepare ourselves for welcoming Jesus Christ into our hearts. And I think the Church gives us this gentle reminder to do something to prepare not only ourselves commercially, but spiritually.
But there's a message of hope in there, isn't there also? How can people embrace that message, especially Ukrainians who are in the UK at the moment and wanting to return home, or even Ukrainians still in the Ukraine suffering persecution, etc.?
Well, I think hope is given because you've invited me on TV to speak about them, so that we don't forget about persecuted Christians, so that we don't forget about those who are being persecuted just because they're Ukrainian. And the hope is there because we keep that message alive. And we wait for the coming of Jesus every year to celebrate his birth.
So what special prayers will you be saying this Advent period?
Well, I think our special prayers will, of course, be for those who are here in the United Kingdom, for especially the sponsors of those who have opened up their hearts and their homes, for government workers who have been graciously helping these Ukrainian people settle and find a temporary place of refuge. We'll be praying for those who still don't know Jesus and who are still seeking him.
Here. Thank you very much for your time today. I really
Thank you,
appreciate
Deacon
it.
Calvin.
That was the Right Reverend Kenneth Nowakowski, Bishop at the Ukrainian Catholic Eparchy of the Holy Family of London. Easy for you to say. Thanks for your time today. Now, plenty more to come this afternoon after the break, as the Church of England vicars are told to avoid carol services on the day of the World Cup final. I'll be asking, what is the state religion, Christianity or football? But first, let's have a look at the latest weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking wet in the southeast with some showers across western parts. Let's take a look at the details. Southwestern England will see a mix of clear spells and scattered showers this evening. The showers will be mainly across Devon and Cornwall and could be locally heavy. Skies across the southeast of England will remain cloudy, and we can expect some further rain at times, especially for Kent and Sussex. Wales will see a showery end to Sunday, with winds also remaining brisk along the west coast. Eastern areas, though, will see some lengthy dry spells. Sunday, however, will end on a dry note across the Midlands, with the clearest skies across the north and west. A few mist and fog patches may also form as the evening goes on. Northeastern England will also be largely dry, but further west there will be some showers, some of which may be heavy. It will be breezy along Irish Sea coast, but lighter winds elsewhere. Showers will be quite widespread across Scotland this evening, with the showers heavy in places. The far northeast, though, may avoid most of the showers and stay largely dry. Northern Ireland, though, won't be so lucky, with scattered showers continuing here throughout the evening. Winds will be brisk, especially along the coast and over the hills. Overnight, we'll see further showers in the west of the UK, but drier further east with some mist and fog patches forming. And that's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narinda.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade on GB News, on TV, online and on your wireless. The Church of England is advising its vicars to reschedule any planned Christmas carol services due to be held on Sunday, December the 18th, the day of the World Cup final, to help avoid a potential clash between the Three Lions and the Three Kings. The Church of England is advising its clergy to hold their carol services on Saturday the 17th instead, despite the final Sunday before Christmas being the traditional day for hosting them. To give his thoughts on this story is Father Daniel French, Anglican vicar and host of the Irreverent podcast, and somewhat of a mentor of mine. Father Daniel, thank you very much for joining us on a Sunday. I know it's your busiest day of the week. Could you start off by telling us exactly what the Church of England's guidance is on this, what they're saying, and how many vicars are planning to follow it?
I think you've summarised it well. I don't know how many are going to follow it in terms of guidance, Calvin. It seems like at the moment, particularly since COVID, we've been getting a long stream of guidance, which seems to say, the obvious, really. Planning carol service is often done months in advance. We were planning ours actually in September. So I think for churches to suddenly change their carols at the last minute is hardly likely, and particularly with cathedrals and larger churches who've planned these maybe back in the spring even. The thought that they're going to move these, often I suspect for also a constituency that isn't renowned really for its love of football. I could understand for some children's services maybe in an afternoon, say at 3 o'clock, but really, are we going to change our church services on Sunday the 18th? I would think not.
Right, and the official guidance says, and I quote, "Could still be possible if you choose the time carefully, but what if there are penalties? It may be best to avoid that day altogether and host a carol service on Saturday the 17th instead." What does this say about the modern Church of England? It seems to me the low expectations, the low standards of, well, people aren't going to come to church because football's more important. Surely we should be encouraging people to come to church first and foremost as the most important part of their week.
Absolutely. A few weeks ago, I was celebrating the Eucharist in my parish church before I've gone on to study leave. And it was great. We have a community gospel choir of 60. There were 100 or so in the church. The atmosphere was wonderful and spiritual and deep. And as I held the bread and the chalice, it suddenly struck me that we are handling the things of God as Christians, and how wonderful that is to do that. How mesmerising, how awe-inspiring. And I think at times we underplay what we're actually doing in church, this intensification of God's work and presence when just 2 or 3 come together. And should we be downplaying that? Yes, I'm not trying to be a spoilsport in any way against what's happening in Qatar. But I think we easily undermine what we're doing and try to imagine that there's some sort of consumer resistance out there that we have to work against. I mean, you and I have spoke often about the impact of, say, the Queen's funeral a month or so ago, and how that was the most watched televised event on the planet ever. Which is our confidence in what we're doing. And the danger is that some of these rather sort of daft chain emails that go around from the Church of England really don't sort of pick up on that. Yesterday, Cardinal Zen in Hong Kong, for instance, who's been imprisoned for his faith and his work with the underground church, was fined as a 90-year-old man witnessing against totality. And I just think, how do we honour that kind of Christian witness? How do we honour, for instance, the Christian witness in Qatar? Where if you look at something like the Open Doors report, or even the US government's own religious report on religious freedoms in that city, They're few and far, actually. The Christian church is only allowed to exist in 7 denominations, and yet we know that there are hundreds of underground house cell churches bravely operating, and there are quite severe penalties for doing so. In fact, there's an even severer penalty on the statute books for becoming a Christian in this country. I mean, part of me likes to think that wouldn't it be wonderful to think maybe this is happening in another universe where the England football team are going to salute. I mean, there's been a lot of gesture politics, hasn't there, with the football? But wouldn't it be marvellous to think that they would actually salute the Christians of Qatar and the sacrifices that they have made over generations? Perhaps the whole team could stand there and make the sign of the cross en masse.
That would be splendid.
I just think we need more confidence, really, in this country about our faith and what we're doing, and what we're handling is the things of God, as I said earlier.
Father, some of us higher up the candle would say we're handling God himself, not just the things of God. Exactly. This is how important this is. And you're right in that, you said about Her Majesty the Queen's funeral. It was the greatest element of mission and evangelism was seen since the cross, I think, on a world scale. But people want that importance, people want that emphasis, and I think the Church of England is letting them down in this guidance. Another option they've suggested is to stage a football-themed nativity play involving the 3 kings following the star to an adaptation of the anthem, Football's Coming Home. We're coming west, we're coming west, we're coming, kings are coming west. I mean, it all undermines the Christmas message. It undermines the faith, doesn't it? And it's just weak, it's lame, and it's pathetic.
I remember a couple of years ago when we put on our first carol service post-COVID, and someone said to me, because Salcombe is where I'm operating, is a parish which is very, very popular for holiday makers, and said that this was the highlight of their year, was this carol service. And I quipped, oh, well, I'll put it on next week if you like it that much, if you contrast this as well to, say, Eric Liddell, from the famous Chariots of Fire film, who on the Sabbath recognised and honoured the Sabbath enough that he was going to not play. Wouldn't it be great if somehow, as churches, we could generate that kind of energy and enthusiasm for what we're doing, that in a sense what would happen in Qatar is they'd say, well, we better not put football on a Sunday.
Exactly. You keep doing what you're doing. Thank you very much for joining us today as well. That was Father Daniel
It's a pleasure.
Anglican vicar and host of the Irreverent podcast. Thank you so much. Now you are with GB News on TV, online and on radio, and after the break, it's been a year since Barbados became a republic, and now it's pursuing damages for the sins of its colonial past. I'll be asking, should we pay reparations to former colonies? Now it's time for a check on those news headlines with Tatiana.
Thank you, Calvin. It's 2:33. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Met Police say the murders of 2 teenagers in south-east London are linked. The 16-year-old boys, Kearney Solanke and Charlie Bartolo, were both stabbed to death yesterday afternoon, around a mile apart in Greenwich. The Met's South-East Deputy Commander has appealed for information.
On Saturday evening, at around 5:10, police were called to reports of 2 people injured in 2 locations. The locations are approximately 1 mile apart. Emergency services attended immediately, and at each location they found a 16-year-old boy suffering stab injuries. Tragically, both boys died of their injuries.
Greater Manchester Police say a man whose body was found covered in potentially hazardous substances was shot and sprayed with acid. 38-year-old Liam Smith's body was found in the street in Wigan on Thursday. The area was cordoned off and residents urged to contact authorities if they felt unwell at the time. A murder investigation is underway. The government says the online safety bill is going to be updated next month to criminalise the encouragement of self-harm. It says the changes have been influenced by Molly Russell, the 14-year-old who ended her life in 2017 after viewing content linked to suicide and self-harm. The new bill would target online material that manipulates the vulnerable, making it illegal to do so. And the Queen Consort is to break with the time-old tradition of having ladies in waiting, opting for Queen's companions instead. Buckingham Palace has announced the names of the 6 women who'll support Camilla in her official duties, in addition to her private and deputy private secretaries. It's believed the companions' work will be similar, but not as extensive as the late Queen's ladies in waiting. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Stay with us. Calvin's back in a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade on GB News, on TV, online and on your wireless. A year after removing the British monarch as its head of state and becoming a republic, Barbados is pursuing damages for what it sees as the sins of its colonial past. Not only does it want Conservative MP Richard Drax, whose ancestors owned the largest slave plantation on the island, for the sins of his forefathers, but it is also pursuing damages from the major British institutions such as Lloyd's of London, Oxford University, the Royal Bank of Scotland, and even the royal family themselves. So should Britain pay reparations for its former colonies? Joining me now is author and journalist Laura Dodsworth and policy researcher Laurie Leyburn. Laura, I'll start with your good self. Should reparations, I usually start off by saying who should pay whom, but I think I'm going to ask a spicier question. Should the former colonies be paying us to say thank you?
No, they shouldn't. No, I don't even need to hesitate in answering that. I think this is such a big, complex, nuanced debate. And it's because the wounds run so deep. There is rightly so much emotion and anger. You know, unarguably, the transatlantic trade was pivotal in raising up the West. And so there are these very strong feelings about gaining compensation for what were absolute horrors and atrocities visited upon millions and millions of people. But I think the question you're saying you should have led with is the right one. Who should pay whom what? Because what do reparations mean? I mean, can I just broaden this out a bit? Because I think reparation is about a state of repair. It is about repairing wrongs. And we should all always live in a state where we try to repair wrongs. I mean, I would say that comes down to the individual. You know, we should try to be morally upright and to redress wrongs. But when you're talking about such a big wrong, it's hard to know where to start. I don't think the British state should pay reparations. That's quite easy for me, because that would imply that the burden falls upon the shoulders of the British taxpayer. The British taxpayer is people who are the descendants of the slave trade. It's people like me who, I mean, I'm not really sure how much I have or haven't benefited from the slave trade. I don't believe that the sins of our ancestors should be visited upon us now. We're in a historical context that we're in now. What's happening in Barbados is about a specific family, the Drax family. And I think there's arguably a case for particular institutions to at least voluntarily be encouraged to consider some form of reparation or restitution, but not the British state. The British state didn't own slaves, and also the British state abolished the slave trade. So we took that moral stance when we did. I think one thing that's difficult about the whole debate is that we did acknowledge reparations should be made, but reparations were made to slave owners. Now, that might have been what was needed to
I'll pause you there, because we'll come to that, because that's a big topic in and of itself. I want to bring Laurie in on what you've just said about essentially the taxpayer cannot fund reparations because it wasn't the taxpayer who benefited from the transatlantic slave trade. Actually, it was a very small elite that did. And this actually, to credit where it's due, Barbados are pursuing that small elite. Should these individuals be paying reparations?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I think it's quite smart on the part of Barbados to be pointing to one specific case with one specific family. I mean, we have to remember here the context is that the Drax family have a very particular role in Barbados. Richard Drax's ancestors were some of the pioneers for the wider model of plantation slavery that took people from West Africa, brought them over, worked them often to death, and then made money from the sugar that was then produced. So to take the issue of reparations and boil it down to a particular place with a particular family, I think is a good example of how we were becoming more tangible in how we're addressing those injustices. And I think, Laura, you spoke very elegantly about that just now. And hopefully some kind of arrangement will be made between the Barbadian state and the Barbadian people and Richard Drax, and that may involve the land that they want to have use over, where the house currently is in Barbados. And I think things like apologies are also potentially appropriate. I know there's been this constant fear about apologising, which we often talk about in the grandest sense of the British state apologising and that opening up all sorts of liabilities. But I don't think we've tried enough of certain instances, and in this case, certain families who could make that apology.
Because the British government made an apology and the British monarchy made an apology, and they expressed regret. Of course, they didn't make an apology in taking responsibility, and nor should they, because then they would be liable. And I don't think that's appropriate. But apologies never seem to be enough, and I don't think reparations ever seem to be enough either. So I'll bring it back to what Laura was saying about we paid as a nation slave owners, because I don't think that was reparations. I think that was one of the many angles that the British Empire tried to abolish slavery. And the British Empire is the only empire in the world who said not only is slavery abhorrent and we shouldn't have it in our own empire, we shouldn't see it anywhere around the world. Yeah. And the British Empire, at great cost to lives and the treasury, stopped slavery everywhere it found it. And one of those methods was paying to free slaves.
Yeah, absolutely. And there were British sailors who lost their lives on ships, becoming diseased because they're holding the line to prevent the transatlantic slave trade. We absolutely took the right moral stance. Of course we did. And apologies have been made. But the thing is, for people now, the idea that those were the financial reparations sticks in the craw. That's what sticks in the craw for people, because this is about ideology and emotion, and the wounds run deep. And in that sense, I don't think reparations ever will be enough. No. You can listen to people on opposing sides of this, people who have a lot more knowledge, a lot more vested interests, and a lot more history of it than I do. You know, Dr. Tony Sewell would say that black people shouldn't be victimised. I've heard him debate on this, on the subject of reparations, and say that African nations should not be asking for aid, not for aid, but for reparations, because they should now be self-reliant. That's his view, as I've understood it in a debate. On the other side, you'd have somebody like Professor Kehinde Andrews at Bristol University, who has used the term revolution and has said, well, there is no end to reparations because you have to look at the harm that's still being perpetuated now as a result of the slave trade, in which case the financial burden would be limitless. So reparation and the state of repair has to run in all directions. And that also includes forgiveness and recovery. Yes. And that's why the whole thing is so complicated, because at some point you have to draw a line. I think there might be a case for more truth and reconciliation and for a more nuanced form of reparation. But as I said, I'm really clear that the British taxpayer should not now pay reparations. Yeah. I'm in a strange situation where I'm half German, and you know, I own a field, actually, somewhere in East Germany, if I were to go through all the legal loopholes to reclaim it. But I gather right now there's a farmer with his pigs on it. I'm aware that if I tried to reclaim my plot of land, I'd quite like my German plot of land that was taken off my very immediate German family in the war. I would be displacing somebody who's using it now.
Yeah, these things are always difficult, but I think what Laura touches on is important in that after an apology comes forgiveness. After repentance is forgiveness, and we can't have one without the other. And it does seem the argument for apologies and reparations is ongoing, will never end, and there will never be enough apologies or enough reparations made. But what I really want to push on is that Laura said a few times there that wounds run deep. What wounds are we considering here? Because I'm obviously of African Caribbean descent myself. I don't live in a victimhood mentality. I don't think whatever may or may not have happened to my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather is relevant necessarily to me in my life. But there are people that are affected by that and do live in that victimhood mentality. Surely we should be trying to help them break free of it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't come from Barbados, so I've got to put my hand up there and say that it would be...
It's hard to tell by looking at you.
It would be good to hear we are hearing the view from people in Barbados because they are saying that they would... Well, there are two things that are being asked for.
I will let you finish, but I just want to make a point, because you just raised, we're hearing from the people. We're not. We're hearing from Barbados, and what they actually did is undemocratic. They went to a republic without putting it to the people. I think that was a big mistake, but sorry, carry on.
So there are two things that were asked that are on the list of the things that the guy who runs the commission in the Caribbean that's looking at things like reparations. And number one on that list is an apology. We've had signals of regret and so on, but we haven't, I don't think, actually tried the apology line enough. And I don't think, I can understand the concerns about that leading to some kind of unlimited liability. But as you know, saying sorry is an important first thing to do and means far more often than we think it does in the moment. I think that then you could imagine a situation where the Barbadian state and the Drax estate get into some kind of deal that has some kind of understanding between them about that process of restitution that can then lead to forgiveness. And I think it's smart here because Barbados are talking about a very specific instance and it's bringing it down from this vast, heated issue that we often hear about into specific cases now where there could be apology, restitution, and then ultimately forgiveness. And I think that would be fantastic because on one side, yes, many of us aren't the Drax family and have not necessarily had direct links to the benefits of these kind of things, and therefore it's very difficult for us to conceive of a situation when we have to pay for reparations. But then on the other side, there are these vast injustices. So to boil it right down to the main kind of protagonists in that moment of injustice, I think is the appropriate thing to do.
The reason I've always started with who pays whom is because I've worried that if we're taking taxpayers' money to pay reparations, what we're actually doing is making sure that poor black people are paying money to rich black people. But you're right in that this is more nuanced, and actually they're going after an individual family. So there might be a case for this that we haven't seen in the wider argument. It's very interesting. But thank you very much for you both. We'll be debating more coming up soon. That was author and journalist Laura Dodsworth and policy researcher Laurie Leyburn. All the L's today. Before we move on to our next debate, let's have a look at what you guys have been saying about today's topics. Martin, on a cashless society, says, we, the British public, through COVID tyranny, are sleepwalking into a seemingly quick and easy cashless society. A centralised digital bank currency is straight out of the CCP state-controlled credit system. Cash is king. Thank you, Martin, for pointing that out. I didn't mention China or social credit systems in my introduction, but you are absolutely right in that this is where it ends. This is the end goal. And we saw Klaus Schwab just this week quoted as saying that China is a model to be copied. Very, very eerie and worrying words indeed. James, on the national religion debate, says, Christianity or football? The UK's national religion is neither of those things. It is a vicarious, unmanaged, incompetent RNHS. James, you're not wrong, unfortunately. Our NHS has become the state religion, but we need to pull it back into Christianity, if you ask me. There's nothing wrong with sport. Sport is great, brings people together. Football's fantastic. But if it comes down to Christ or kicking a ball, I'll choose Christ every day of the week. On Red Wednesday, Arthur says, it was very interesting to hear the discussion on persecuted Christians and Red Wednesday. So important to raise awareness of these issues. Thank you, Arthur, for the support. And of course, you can get in touch with the Ukrainian Cathedral if you want to pop on down there or show any further support. Robert, on reparations, says, should we demand reparations from the Vikings, Romans and the Normans who invaded England? Where does it stop? Maybe Jamaica should demand reparations from the African countries who sold people into slavery as well. Absolute madness. I think you're onto something there, Robert. My family are from Jamaica, and I did look into our family history and saw that we would have originally been from Nigeria, from North Africa. And actually, the Nigerians were selling Nigerians long before the white man turned up. So if I'm looking for personal reparations from Nigeria, if you get your purse out. It has been reported that the government could raise the pension age to 68, several years earlier than expected as part of the Treasury's big bazooka bid to save billions of pounds. This means that workers currently in their 50s could have an extra wait of an extra year before receiving their state pension. And more people will see their working lives extended to their 70s. But with an increasingly ageing population and a higher life expectancy, was raising the pension age an inevitability? Now, still with me in the studio is author and journalist Laura Dodsworth and policy researcher Laurie Leyburn. I'll start with you this time, Laurie. I don't think by the time I retire, if I ever do retire, that I'll be able to get a pension. This is keeping, isn't it?
I know what you mean. It does. There's a particular dimension to this when you are younger, in the wider context of how, we know now that younger generations are probably not going to be as better off as their parents were. And I think that's an element of what seems a bit like unfairness here. For me, there's something a bit more immediate, which is the reason why we have always extended pension age out is because of the idea that as life expectancy goes up, it's appropriate that as people live longer and hopefully healthier lives, then maybe you should be retiring a bit later, right? But one of the key problems here is that life expectancy increase has not manifested, right? So we're not living the longer lives that maybe we anticipated when we were forecasting pushing up the pension age as time went on. They're not necessarily healthier lives as well. We know the problems a lot with the problems with health, public health in this country now. And also the work that people may be doing as they head out beyond the current pension age might not pay because we're in a situation where pay has stagnated for such a long time in this country. So on one side, I say, yes, I can see in any society where life expectancy is going up and people are living healthier lives and work pays well, it's appropriate to do this. But then we as citizens would say, yeah, fair enough, government, I can see that things are improving, your policies are partly to do with that, it's proportionate to raise the pension age. But that sort of social contract, as some people put it, is starting to break down slightly. So
I'll come to Laura in a minute, but I want to ask you why you're here, Laurie. Are we living better lives? I looked at the pictures of, the King's death and around the funeral, the time of the funeral, compare those pictures with today. First of all, what stuck out to me is that people used to dress smart and we don't get all scruffy. But secondly, people are so obese now. Nobody was fat in the old photographs of the King's funeral. It was amazing. Are we living life too good?
I think that things like obesity and other long-term health problems like that the reasons for those are complex. It's very easy sometimes to think that... Answer. Well, yeah, I mean, it's very easy to sometimes to see pictures like that and say, well, look at this, everyone's, having a quality of living is so high now that we're all eating ourselves to death or so on. But that's not the case. The availability of good quality food, the availability of exercise and other things.
More available than it's ever been. Exercise is cheap and free.
Totally.
People can cook good food.
But what's your insinuation there? That we've now got it so good that we must therefore suffer more, or that we should be more austere, or so on?
That is my opinion. Yes, but we have it too good. Laura, I'm going to put it to you. Should we actually have public pensions?
Oh my goodness, that's not what I thought I was going to be answering. I'm not sure.
Answer the question you thought you were going to be answering.
Okay.
That's what politicians do.
Well, okay, let me bring my pre-prepared answer. I didn't have one. I mean, in principle, I don't disagree with the idea of raising the pension age. The problem is, like Laurie said, that actually life expectancies aren't continuing to increase. In fact, they've gone down since the pandemic. But more than that, the number of years people spend in ill health has increased. Now, in this country, the average age that men move into ill health, and women, is their early 60s. So if you're not working, if you're not able to work, you're going to be on some kind of benefits anyway, disability or other benefits, because you're not going to be able to work. I think it is right that the triple lock was preserved for now, because, I mean, I know pensioners who can't afford to heat their homes. Yeah. You cannot live on a state pension. I don't expect to live on my state pension. I've been paying into a private pension where I can afford not very much, since my 20s, and I don't expect to have any pension by the time I retire. What I think is quite unfair right now is that people have only got 10 years to get their house in order. Yeah. And I think that's a really tough position to put people in. On the other hand, they had most of 2020 off in their gardens, so they've had part of their pension off already.
I'm with you.
But, you know, we're paying for a cost of lockdown crisis. Yeah. It's going to save the Treasury about £10 billion. Great, but we lost about a third of that on furlough fraud. Yep. Test and trace, which was basically just chucked into the wind, was £37 billion. This government doesn't keep any of its promises, and it's wasting our tax pounds anyway. It's all our money. And so I just don't have any confidence that the savings that they make will be put to the right use. We're paying for totally failed policies. And actually, that's kind of a deep seam of anger for me, that while I might agree in principle with the idea of raising the pension age, it's not a silver bullet because people aren't living longer and they're in poor health for a variety of complicated reasons, and I don't like what this government does with our money. I
don't like what any government does with our money. I never trust a government with our money. Laura makes a lot of sound points. I think what we're looking at here is short-termism. I think it's the problem that each government is looking what they can do within their 5 years rather than looking at the country as a whole. Should we be addressing the fact that we cannot have a triple lock on pensions forever and we need to phase that out? Should we be telling a certain generation that actually you're not going to have a public pension, you need to start investing in your own private pension from now? Is that the future?
I mean, I think that would be a hugely generationally antagonistic thing to do, because anyone who's below a certain age is going to be there watching then an older generation benefit from things like the triple lock, which, as we've learned, is an important thing for many pensions across the country.
Certainly,
because they wouldn't
in the short term.
Yeah, exactly, to be able to get through the
energy costs, and inflation.
Exactly. I mean, I think, you know, before all of this, you know, the government has got to turn around and say, well, look, we might be raising the pension age soon. We will raise it soon, but we're going to do all these things to make sure that work pays, that we're going to get the increase in life expectancy back on the rails again, and that we're going to make sure that the country is generally healthier. And then it becomes a proportionate move that you'd be able to raise the pension age. But so many people are in work and in poverty, and you can't expect them to work more in work and in poverty. You've got to address those things, or else that contract between citizen and state is starting to break down.
I think where you're on the money, Laurie, is the government should be looking at different issues, such as lifestyle and improvement, not just GDP, which seems to be the sole focus of our current government. But thank you both very much. That was wonderful. The author and journalist Laura Dodsworth and public policy researcher Laurie Layburn. You're watching Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, and I'll be back with you after the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking wet in the southeast with some showers across western parts. Let's take a look at the details. Southwestern England will see a mix of clear spells and scattered showers this evening. The showers will be mainly across Devon and Cornwall and could be locally heavy. Skies across the southeast of England will remain cloudy, and we can expect some further rain at times, especially for Kent and Sussex. Wales will see a showery end to Sunday, with winds also remaining brisk along the west coast. Eastern areas, though, will see some lengthy dry spells. Sunday, however, will end on a dry note across the Midlands, with the clearest skies across the north and west. A few mist and fog patches may also form as the evening goes on. Northeastern England will also be largely dry, but further west there will be some showers, some of which may be heavy. It will be breezy along Irish Sea coast, but lighter winds elsewhere. Showers will be quite widespread across Scotland this evening, with the showers heavy in places. The far northeast, though, may avoid most of the showers and stay largely dry. Northern Ireland, though, won't be so lucky, with scattered showers continuing here throughout the evening. Winds will be brisk, especially along the coast and over the hills. Overnight, we'll see further showers in the west of the UK, but drier further east with some mist and fog patches forming. And that's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello and welcome back. This is Calvin's Common Sense Crusade on your TV, radio and online. This hour I'll be asking, are there parts of the Bible that are no longer appropriate in modern society? We'll discuss the England fans dressed as crusaders at the World Cup and how looking after your grandkids can prevent loneliness. But first, it's the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you, Calvin. It's 1 minute past 3. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Met Police have said the murders of 2 teenagers in south-east London are linked. Our national reporter, Theo Chukwamba, was at the police press conference earlier on where the 2 boys were named. Theo, what do we know so far?
Yes, it's been a difficult and challenging day here in the community of Thamesmead in South East London. Yesterday afternoon around 5:10, the police received calls about incidents and emergency services went there, but unfortunately to their best efforts they were unable to do anything at that moment, and the 2 young men were pronounced dead. And in terms of today's press conference, they were named as both Kiani Solanke here in Titmus Avenue in Thamesmead, and just less than a mile away in Abbeywood, Charlie Bartolo and Sewell Road in Abbeywood. And now the police are appealing to anyone who has any information or saw anything. They do say we've heard from some people already, but they're saying if anyone else has any more information, please get in touch with them on 101. And earlier we heard from the Deputy Commander of the Met here in the South East.
On Saturday evening at around 5:10, police were called to reports of 2 people injured in 2 locations. The locations are approximately 1 mile apart. Emergency services attended immediately, and at each location they found a 16-year-old boy suffering stab injuries. Tragically, both boys died of their injuries.
That was the Met Police's South East Deputy Commander. In other news, the government says the online safety bill is going to be updated next month to criminalise the encouragement of self-harm. It says the changes have been influenced by Molly Russell, the 14-year-old who ended her life in 2017 after viewing content linked to suicide and self-harm. The new bill would target online material that manipulates the vulnerable, making it illegal to do so. Alice Hendy is the founder of a suicide prevention charity. She lost her brother to suicide and says the bill should have come out sooner.
the online safety bill itself has taken far too long to come out. I mean, we've seen countless delays, countless revisions. It's seen revisions now under 3 prime ministers. This is an urgent bill, and the longer we leave it, the more lives, unfortunately, are going to be destroyed, and the more families out there are going to feel like mine.
Cases of diphtheria among asylum seekers in a Kent migrant centre are thought to have risen. It's after a man at the Manston Migrant Processing Centre is thought to have died from the disease. Concerns have been raised over the spread of the infection as people were moved from the overcrowded facility to hotels around the country. The government is expected to announce tomorrow the number of infections has climbed to around 50. Greater Manchester Police say a man whose body was found covered in potentially hazardous substances was sprayed with acid. 38-year-old Liam Smith's body was found in the street in the Kilburn Drive area of Wigan on Thursday. He'd also been shot. The area was quickly cordoned off and residents who were feeling unwell at the time urged to contact authorities. A murder investigation is ongoing. Protests against COVID lockdown measures are continuing in China after 10 people died in a tower block fire in Urumqi. Demonstrators claim coronavirus measures, which have seen residents locked down for as long as 100 days, may have impeded their escape. Civil unrest has now spread to Shanghai and Beijing at a level unseen since President Xi Jinping took office, with chants calling for him to resign. Yesterday, China reported a record number of COVID cases for a 3rd day in a row. The Met Police said it's fully prepared for potential activist disruption in London ahead of Christmas. The force believes Just Stop Oil protesters are planning activity in the capital from tomorrow until the 14th of December. It said it has policing measures in place to respond to potential disruption. The climate group has been using civil resistance as part of its campaign to stop future gas and oil projects, including holding up the M25. The Prince and Princess of Wales have paid tribute to rugby union great Weir Doddy, who died yesterday, aged 52. In a tweet, the royal couple called the former Scotland international and British-Irish line a hero and inspiration. Weir, who'd suffered from motor neuron disease since 2016, used his profile to raise awareness of the condition and generate funds through his charity foundation. Paul Thompson, Director of Fundraising for My Name's Doddy, says his legacy is the fight against MND. And the Queen Consort is to break with the time-old tradition of having ladies-in-waiting, opting for Queen's companions instead. Buckingham Palace has announced the names of the 6 women who will support Camilla in her official duties, in addition to her private and deputy private secretaries. It's believed the companions' work will be similar, but not as extensive as the late Queen's ladies-in-waiting. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Calvin.
Hello and welcome to the Common Sense Crusade on GB News, on TV, online and on your wireless. Here's what's coming up this afternoon. After the Crown Prosecution Service claims parts of the Bible no longer appropriate for modern society, I'll be asking, are there parts of the Bible that are out of date? And later on, one royal commentator says the late Queen thought Prince Harry a little too in love with Meghan, and that if anyone deserves an anti-racism award, it's King Charles, not Harry and Meghan. And then England fans have been told not to dress up as St George for fear of insulting Muslims in Qatar after 2 supporters were apparently led away by World Cup security. And of course, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or by tweeting at gbnews. There's forward. Charges have been dropped against a street preacher in a case in which the Crown Prosecution Service attempted to argue that parts of the Bible are abusive and no longer appropriate in modern society. The case has sparked debate over the place of Scripture and Christian belief in the modern world. with some saying they agree with the CPS's arguments, while others state this is the latest attack on the Christian faith. Joining me now is Reverend Michael Corran, Anglican priest and former chaplain to Queen Elizabeth II, Dr. Gavin Ashenden. Reverend Corran is with me in the studio, so I'll start with you. What was your impression when you saw this ridiculous story?
Well, ridiculous, I suppose, was the reaction. The Bible is dangerous. Scripture should be challenging and provocative. That's the whole point. But this was a facile gesture, I suppose. Look, you can take the Bible literally and you can take it seriously, but you can't really do both. You have to really stress the fact that there is metaphor, there is imagery, there's emotion, and there's absolute truth. I don't believe it's divine dictation. I do believe it's the inspired word of God. But that there are passages that can seem jarring, well, you require an intelligent, prayerful analysis of what it's really saying. But this is just legalese to make an impression. But it is potentially very dangerous, because once you say about any holy text, by the way, that it might be too offensive to read, too offensive to show in public, that means its followers are the same, and that leads to religious oppression.
I don't think it would be said about any religious text. I think there are certain religious texts it would never be said about. But of course, you're right in that the Bible has many literary styles within it. But Father Ashenden, it's the most scandalous story ever told. Of course, it's supposed to be jarring. Of course, it's supposed to be offensive at times and challenging. What would have happened, do you think, if the CPS won?
Well, I think both you and Michael are right. This wouldn't happen to another sacred text. It wouldn't happen to Hinduism, and it certainly wouldn't happen to Islam. And so I think what we need to take away from that is that this is a war on Christian culture. It's trying to move Christian culture out of the public square. And it's also a war on the Christian conscience, so that people whose conscience is informed by the Bible, as our ancestors and the people who built our society have been for 1,500 years, no longer have a place in society. If the CPS had won, it would have established a precedent that would have put us all on the wrong side of the law and essentially made us potentially liable for some form of thought crime. But they tried it. They tried it very hard, and thank goodness they didn't succeed. I think what we have to do is to try and encourage the people we live amongst, our culture, to acknowledge that freedom of religious conscience is something that ought to exist for everybody under the law, and that includes Christians. It's very odd that it's part of the coronation service, but not available to a man trying to express his faith in the public place.
Absolutely. And Reverend Corran, we've seen this in this instance, but also in other cases. My friend Caroline Farrow has been at the hand of the police in this. How much involvement should the police have with matters concerning preaching?
Well, hardly any at all. But remember, Scripture says a great deal, for example, about how we should regard the rich and the powerful. It talks about redistribution of wealth. It talks about the poor and the marginalised. It's a radical document. What tends to happen is when someone is preaching about sexuality, and, I'm here as a sort of, token liberal progressive, but I understand what this is about. I may disagree with this person. I mean, I support equal marriage. I suppose that I'm left of centre on this issue. But people do have a right to move against the status quo and the establishment. And we are mature enough to say, ignore. I walked here today and past Speaker's Corner, and there were people saying things, fundamentalist Christians, and I thought it was ridiculous. And you know what I did? I walked past. I ignored them. We do have that ability, and we have that right in this country. And the idea of the police, I don't think the police want to be involved, but getting the police involved and then a legal prosecution of someone for having an opinion that I may disagree with, no, that this is, wherever it comes from, the left or the right, it's absolutely unacceptable. And I'll say again, potentially profoundly dangerous.
I'm with you on some of that. Father Ashenden, I think, of course, Scripture is going to clash with aspects of the modern world, of course. So I agree with CPS in some aspects of this, but let's move away from them into the broader conversation, because we're called to be in the world but not of the world, aren't we? So we're never supposed to catch up to modern society. We're never supposed to catch up to the modern world or modern times. Is that not the point of Scripture, that it's supposed to be rooted in moral absolution?
I think it is. I think we're supposed to be both an irritant and an antiseptic. We're supposed to irritate things that need irritating, complacency and injustice. And we're supposed to be an antiseptic in the sense that if you take the values that we represent or we've taken for our own lives, they will improve society enormously. And we can prove that because we can look back over the history of the last 1,500 years, and where Christianity has been applied well, it's produced the very best kind of human flourishing. So yes, it's what we we are offering society is not just for ourselves. It's not a matter of please do what we want because we're trying to impose it on you. On the whole, Christians are people who say we've tried living both ways. We've tried the secular way and other ways, and we've discovered in Christ and in the Bible the very best way for human flourishing. Try it, you'll like it. But what we can't manage is when society energizes the police and the criminal justice service to make that choice impossible. We have to be able to give people a choice, which means we need to tell them what the Bible says in private and in public.
And Reverend Curran, as a self-proclaimed liberal progressive...
and an irritant as well. I think I'll claim that as my title.
Your new bio on Twitter. Is this another case of laws being brought in to protect, yet again, harming people's freedoms?
I believe in legislation to protect people who have traditionally been persecuted and marginalised. But there is, and it's a very difficult, but there is a meeting point and a balance. And I've worked very closely with the gay community in Canada. And if you speak to those who've campaigned for years, often they say, I think we have gone far enough. I might not like what that person says, but I don't really care very much. When it comes to employment and housing and so on and physical protection, that's one thing. But a statement, an outrageous statement, once again, ignore what someone is saying. It's not as though this person had the airwaves speaking to millions of people. There was a small group of people who heard him, and most of whom didn't even know what was being said, and they just walked on. It's made a bigger case by people, I suppose, who want to show their righteousness, which is ironic because they seem to object to other people showing theirs.
I think that's hitting the nail on the head, isn't it, Father Ashenden, in that it's no longer the case that we protect people's views, even if we disagree with them. It's the case that the vast majority of, well, not even the vast majority, the vocal minority want to suppress views that are different to their own because they see them as harmful. And they see our views, they see our faith as harmful. That's what it fundamentally comes down to, isn't it?
Yes, I think the place I'd want to amend Father Michael's point of view is to say that we've always been wanted to look after minorities and the vulnerable. Christianity has always done that. After all, God came in the most vulnerable possible way. I think the thing that I want to say is that it's not the gay community that is vulnerable. I've not read for decades of anybody losing their job because they had a rainbow flag, but I read every week in and
Orlando
out.
shooting?
The Christians are marginalised for wearing crosses at work. The vast majority of society is rainbow orientated, absolutely for LGBTC, and a huge majority, the minority, are Christians who say that we want to live a different kind of sexual ethic, and for that we are being marginalised and persecuted. All kind liberals ought to come to the aid of Christians who are being marginalised as minorities who want to live in a way that allows their conscience integrity.
I don't want to take this conversation into sexual ethics because we've had that debate, but I do find it interesting that there is this vocal minority who seem to think that their view is different and therefore should be superior and suppressing any other view. But before we move on, I couldn't let this one go. A Cambridge academic has claimed in a sermon that Jesus had a trans body. The Dean of Trinity College said exploring such a view was legitimate after a row over the sermon. Reverend Curran, I'll start with you. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, explore away if you like. I mean, I am very much in favour of rediscovering the real Jesus, a Jewish man who lived 2,000 years ago, who came to us to offer salvation and peace and understanding and truth. And the depictions of him in medieval art may be vague and enigmatic in terms of sexuality, but that's the era of the artist, not the reality of Jesus. So, I mean, this is... It's a bit tiresome because we should be exploring the reality of a figure of world importance, whether you're a Christian or not. To say this, I suspect, to make a certain point, and maybe even to be discussed on a station like this, it's really it's a waste of people's time. No, Jesus. For the longest time, I would say this. He was depicted as a white, blonde, Aryan figure. That I find offensive. He was a man of the Middle East.
Sorry, I'm sorry. What's offensive about white and blonde?
Because it's not true. Because it's not true.
But I'm going to stop you. I'm going to stop you because to suggest it's offensive for Christ to be portrayed as a white blonde man. Would you go to Japan and say, actually, your pictures of Christ as a Japanese man I find offensive?
I'll tell you why.
Of course you would.
Calvin, I'll tell you why.
This is what art does. It represents.
Because as someone of Jewish heritage, my people have been persecuted over the years.
Well, who are your people?
Let me finish.
Jews or Christians? Who are your people?
Yeah, but come on. We're not into cancel culture. People have been persecuted for centuries because Jesus was thought to be a European figure, and those who didn't fit in, who didn't conform, weren't quite good. The real authentic Middle Eastern Jesus, I embrace that. But the idea that he had a trans body, I think, is just a digression from reality and irrelevant.
Yeah, OK, I see your point, but I don't agree. I think it's terrible to say that Christ has been portrayed as a European figure. In Europe, yes. In Japan, he was portrayed as Japanese. In China, as Chinese. In Persia, as Persian. Local artists portray what they know. That's what art is. It's not about any kind of racism or Eurocentrism. That's a nonsense. But to Father Ashenden, to talk about this idea of a trans Jesus, or even getting to know the real Jesus. The creeds tell us who the real Jesus is. Truly God and truly man. And man, son of God, a human being who was in the form of a male, an adult human male. Is this not the case?
Yes, well, I want to say hello, cousin, to Michael. I'm Jewish too. Wonderful to meet you here. And the next thing I want to say is that the relationship that we have with Jesus is mystical and spiritual before it's racial. So to anyone who starts putting whatever notions of race we have of Jesus, obviously he's Jewish, part of God's people, but colour or hair, I'm bald. I simply don't find it difficult at all that Jesus had a full head of hair. But the other thing I want to say is that what the Christianity teaches us is that Jesus gets to make us more like him. That's the deal. Whenever you find somebody making Jesus more like them, that's not the deal. So what happened in Cambridge was an inverse process and a perverse process. And we shouldn't be surprised because the academies like that sometimes. They don't know where to stop. But we should say that we want equal treatment. They should not do to Jesus what they would not do to Muhammad in the present circumstances. And they have very badly overstepped the mark of equality of religion by treating our Lord and our Saviour in such a casual and peremptory way. And it's perfectly right for Christians to object. I'm very pleased that the strongest language was used to try and give them some sense of proportion.
Yeah, I'm also pleased to see the students stood up against this heresy and this blasphemy. Thank you both very much. Plenty more to come this afternoon on my Common Sense Crusade. After the break, a later one on the royal commentator who says that late Queen thought Prince Harry a little too in love with Meghan, and that if anyone deserves an anti-racism award, it's King Charles, not Harry and Meghan. But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking wet in the southeast with some showers across western parts. Let's take a look at the details. Southwestern England will see a mix of clear spells and scattered showers this evening. The showers will be mainly across Devon and Cornwall and could be locally heavy. Skies across the southeast of England will remain cloudy, and we can expect some further rain at times, especially for Kent and Sussex. Wales will see a showery end to Sunday, with winds also remaining brisk along the west coast. Eastern areas, though, will see some lengthy dry spells. Sunday, however, will end on a dry note across the Midlands, with the clearest skies across the north and west. A few mist and fog patches may also form as the evening goes on. Northeastern England will also be largely dry, but further west there will be some showers, some of which may be heavy. It will be breezy along Irish Sea coast, but lighter winds elsewhere. Showers will be quite widespread across Scotland this evening, with the showers heavy in places. The far northeast, though, may avoid most of the showers and stay largely dry. Northern Ireland, though, won't be so lucky, with scattered showers continuing here throughout the evening. Winds will be brisk, especially along the coast and over the hills. Overnight, we'll see further showers in the west of the UK, but drier further east with some mist and fog patches forming. And that's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards in public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narendra.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Crusade on GB News, on TV, online and on your wireless. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are mired in controversy once again after it was announced they will be awarded the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award for standing up to structural racism in the monarchy and for their willingness to speak up and to change the narrative on social justice. Grown. Justifying their decision, the organisation's president, Kerry Kennedy, stated they went to the oldest institution in the UK and told them what they were doing wrong. It comes as the conflict between the Sussexes and the royal family seems set to only deepen with the new king's reign. With me now is Michael Cole, former BBC royal correspondent. Thank you for joining us this Sunday, Michael. I couldn't believe the words I was reading just then. Have Meghan and Harry finally burnt their bridges with the royal family?
Calvin, you summed it up brilliantly, but I just must revert to your wonderful last discussion because, you know, St. Joan of Arc, she was a saint, but was she also a man? And does it even matter? These are matters from Middle Ages. But let's, turning to the present day, we've got the two brothers, Prince William and Prince Harry, both on the East Coast of America, Prince William and his wife in Boston, and Prince Harry and Meghan Markle in New York, both interacting with generous hosts from the Kennedy family. Prince William will be in Boston talking about his Earthshot program, which will get a lot of good press and is an excellent initiative. And this award, which is being given to Prince Harry and Meghan. Well, I think the comment on that has already been made by his older brother, William, when he shouted out, "This is very much not a racist family." And I think I do agree with that. Racism was anathema to the late Queen. As early as 1960, she was dancing a dance which I think was called the High Life with Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana. And later she danced with Kenneth Kaunda in Zambia. And how could she be a racist? She was the monarch of many overseas realms, her people, her countries. And if anybody did tremendous work throughout her life to bring together the various races and religions of the Commonwealth, I think nobody did more than the Queen. She really believed in the efficacy and value of the Commonwealth, which was set up and was a lasting legacy by her father, King George VI, in 1947. And she continued that work, and she really believed in it. For her, in the royal family, the Commonwealth wasn't just somewhere warm to go in the winter. It was something she believed in, and she wanted Prince Charles to carry on. And I think the charge was very, very unfair. Of course, it was unspecific when it was made on that notorious interview with Oprah Winfrey. The charge of racism is a particularly vile one because it's easy to make and it's hard to refute. You can rebut it all you like, but there is this lingering suspicion. And I don't think it's very fair at all. I think you look at what people do rather than what you think they are thinking. And by their very actions, the royal family over the decades have been in the forefront of breaking down racial barriers. Perhaps you have a different view, but I would be surprised if you did, because you're fair-minded.
I am with you on this one, Michael. I've been the victim of racism throughout my life, and it's a horrible thing, which is why I hate it when people throw around that word willy-nilly without any backing up of evidence or anything, just because they know it tars, they know it sticks, and it's almost an abusive term to label people with these days. But I want to move on to, because is this laser focus that we have on Meghan and all her faults, and there are many, is that perhaps shielding other members of the royal family from needed criticism?
Well, I don't think so. I think what we're seeing now, and I think it is quite interesting, Calvin, the new king is only 3 months into his new reign, and he's very much taking the reins, spelt differently, into his own hands. And I think members of his own royal family are feeling that, because we have his younger brother, Prince Andrew. He's banished to royal darkness, never to come back again. I think if Prince Harry, with his book in January, published in January, called Spare, if he rattles a lot of skeletons in the royal closet, then I think there's a very strong case that the new king, who is putting his stamp on things, will actually remove his honorific title HRH. And then, of course, we have the case of Prince Edward. I mean, he was definitely promised the dukedom of Edinburgh by his father and by his mother. Indeed, it was on his website that he would become Duke of Edinburgh. And to give him credit, for the last 30 years, and I've witnessed this, he has worked very, very hard for the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme, which is his father's lasting legacy and a valued one around the world. And it would have made sense, it would have been decent if he'd been able to take over the dukedom of Edinburgh. But apparently it is true that His Majesty the King is thinking of reserving this title for Princess Charlotte, only 7 years old. It seemed to me like a bit of a burden to put on a little child's shoulders to become a royal duchess. But that apparently is what he wants to happen. There we are, a lovely picture of her with a beautiful little butterfly. And she obviously acted absolutely impeccably during the Queen's funeral, and she was seen there. The Prince of Wales took the gamble of taking their children to a very, very grown-up occasion, their great-grandmother's funeral, and they behaved impeccably. But it's a bit of a burden, and I don't know what you think, but I think it evokes unfortunate, tragic memories of the Romanovs, the imperial family of Russia. Wow.
I didn't think you were going to take it there. But I'm with you in that it seems like a snub. It seems like Prince Edward should have become the Duke of Edinburgh, and it seems now that we'll have the Duchess of Edinburgh Awards instead of the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. It all seems a bit messed up, but I see what the King is trying to do in slimming down the royal family. But anyway, I always love to get your analysis. Thank you so much, Michael Cole, former BBC royal correspondent. You are with GB News on TV, radio and online. And after the break, England fans have been told not to dress up as St George for fear of insulting Muslims in Qatar after 2 supporters were apparently led away by World Cup security. Now it's time for a check on those news headlines with the singing Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you very much, Calvin. It's 3:33. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Met Police say the murders of 2 teenagers in south-east London are linked The 16-year-old boys, Kearney Solanke and Charlie Bartolo, were both stabbed to death yesterday afternoon, around a mile apart in Greenwich. The Met's South East Deputy Commander has appealed for information.
On Saturday evening, at around 5:10, police were called to reports of 2 people injured in 2 locations. The locations are approximately 1 mile apart. Emergency services attended immediately, and at each location they found a 16-year-old boy suffering stab injuries. Tragically, both boys died of their injuries.
Protests against COVID lockdown measures are continuing in China after 10 people died in a tower block fire in Urumqi. Demonstrators claim coronavirus measures, which have seen residents locked down for as long as 100 days, may have impeded their escape. Civil unrest has now spread to Shanghai and Beijing at a level unseen since President Xi Jinping took office, with chants calling for him to resign. The government says the online safety bill that's going to be updated next month will criminalise the encouragement of self-harm. It said the changes have been influenced by Molly Russell, the 14-year-old girl who ended her life in 2017 after viewing content linked to suicide and self-harm. The new bill would target online material that manipulates the vulnerable, making it illegal to do so. And the Queen Consort is to break with the time-old tradition of having ladies in waiting, opting for Queen's companions instead. Buckingham Palace has announced the names of the 6 women who are going to support Camilla in her official duties, in addition to her private and deputy private secretaries. It's believed the companions' work will be similar, but not as extensive as the late Queen's ladies in waiting. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Stay with us. Calvin's back in a moment.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by 2 of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade on GB News, on TV, online and on your wireless. England fans attending the World Cup in Qatar have been warned against dressing as St. George or wearing other Crusader-inspired imagery, as it may be unwelcome in the Islamic world. 2 supporters dressed as knights have already been denied access to the stadiums in Doha amid the latest controversy plaguing this year's tournament. It appears, however, that many fans are naive of the wider context rather than aiming to be deliberately malicious whilst in the Gulf state. With me now is sports broadcaster Aidan McGee. Aidan, Brits have been wearing St George's Cross forever. It's nothing to do with Islamic State.
No, it's not. You can go back to, well, I mean, I went to, my first tournament was 1998 over in France. I remember it was there everywhere. Not just Crusades as well, not just Crusader outfits, all kind of, any kind of livery that depicts the fact that they're English fans. You know, in fact, there was, back in the 80s, I mean, I remember on television, it was Union flags. And then there was a kind of line in the sand where it was, I think they realised that the other nations were getting a bit stronger, and therefore we had to identify as English. But it was harmless. It was taken in good faith. I think there's just a lack of understanding on the ground, really, for which FIFA has to take some blame. Really, they signed the memorandum of understanding. They knew exactly what a World Cup in Qatar would look like, as would the FA. And so, therefore, I think it's up to FIFA to educate the country that they're in.
But Qatar must have also known what was going to happen once they hosted a World Cup of football, surely?
Yeah, they did. Well, you would think they would do their diligence. I mean, the last time was only 4.5 years ago, so you'd think they would have had some delegates there.
Yeah.
So I don't think that it would be beyond the realms of their capacity of understanding to realise that that's how football fans behave, unless they just thought, we're going to do it ourselves, we're not going to pay any attention to how anyone's done it before, you're going to respect our rules. Now, there is a degree of, as Gavin Peacock said last night with Dawn Neeson, he said you cannot just land, it's almost neo-colonialism to go and just land in a foreign territory and say, this is how you've got to live your life. Qatar is 50 years old. 10 years before that, Germany, who are one of the protagonists this week and one of the 7 federations who are making their feelings known, they were marching through Europe preaching a glossary of Nazi Germany, or Nazification. So I don't believe that we're always in a position to lecture. And what's more, Calvin, to a Muslim country which is dry and has its own customs, and their behaviour within this tournament is entrenched in their faith, the idea that we're going to change opinions, that's pie in the sky, it really is. Right. It's not going to happen.
I saw Gavin Peacock's interview. I thought it was quite interesting because the whole idea that they have their culture, they have their values, then they know what they are and they're comfortable with them. Who are we to go in there and say, actually, you need to be flying the rainbow flag? Is it virtue signalling on the part of these footballers with their £500,000 watches with a little rainbow rim around the edge of the Rolex?
500 grand and the rest, yeah. But no, listen, the FA signed an agreement with Stonewall back in November 2018. That was the line in the sand. There is nobody with the FA and within the Premier League with any political awareness. They probably didn't know what they were getting into. They've realised some years later that once you follow this path, it's a one-way street with a minimum speed limit of about 1,000 miles an hour. There's no turning back. And so you end up doubling down. You end up taking it to the nth degree, like the German squad did today by covering their mouths. Also, not today, yeah, well, they probably will do it this evening. They'll do it in a few days' time. And these are corporate interests. That's what it's about. The players as well as individuals, even though they're beholden to the FA because that's who they're working for in this tournament, they have their individual boot deals with Puma, with Nike, with Adidas, who all probably sign up with Stonewall as well. So once you allow Stonewall to infiltrate football, as it has with local councils, as it has with education, as it has in large parts of the media, you're inviting a problem which is very, very difficult to alleviate further down the line. Once you agree to that, it's very difficult to turn back, and we're seeing the manifestation of that at this tournament.
So it's not about moral values, it's not even about virtue signalling, it's about money.
Without doubt, yeah, without doubt. Anyone who thinks that all the FA delegates and the board members and the players and the managers and the coaches and the media suddenly woke up about 4.5 years ago and developed a social conscience, when, let's face it, the World Cup was given to Qatar back in 2010. They've had 12 years to sort this mess out, to either take it away or agree when you go there that you're going to wind your neck in a little bit. But it's difficult when... See, the FA, when they signed this agreement with Stonewall, they thought it was just going to be, oh, well, OK, it's good for business, a few hashtags on Twitter, a few rainbow laces, some badges, you know, a bit of just gesture politics that they're into. When it came to actually making a stand and saying, actually, FIFA have said they're going to impose sanctions. By the way, the FA didn't disclose what those sanctions were, by the way, which is interesting, despite being asked several times. Once you go into that tournament and then you're required to actually make a stand and back up everything you believed in for the last 4 years, but when it comes down to points, and points is it's easy for me to say points quite glibly, but points equal prizes equal money, so it all stems from the same thing. Then they backtrack from that, and suddenly, as Gareth Southgate was saying this week, oh, it's becoming a bit of a sideshow now. We're having to that football has to take precedence. Well, hello, I would have told someone that about 3 weeks ago, that the football that's what we're there for. We're there to play football.
It's all a game.
Yeah, well, it is, but it's a very rich game, and nobody makes Stonewall weren't that interested in getting involved in other sports. They wanted football because of its reach.
That's where the money.
They wanted the numbers.
I'm with you there. Thank you very much, Ada McGee. And also joining us on this conversation is Dr. Zaria Masani, historian and author. Zaria, thank you very much for joining us this Sunday. Why might this choice of dress, the Crusaders who turned up in Qatar, why might this upset the Arab world for those of us who don't know this history?
Well, clearly because the security guards concerned hadn't a clue about Monty Python, the fact that these people were actually imitating a comedy spoof on the Crusades. They weren't dressing as Crusaders, they were dressing as characters out of Monty Python. The fact that they had St. George's crosses on them is, as your other contributor said, quite normal when England is playing. So the whole thing is really a storm in a teacup. What is concerning is that the fans concerned were really manhandled by the guards. They were meant to strip naked and humiliated in a way that was totally unnecessary. They weren't just turned away. And I do think, I do disagree with your previous contributor about flying the rainbow flag, because I think I have nothing to do with Stonewall and very little to do with football either. But I think major sporting events like this ought not to happen in countries that have a terrible homophobic record. We wouldn't do it in Iran. Why do it in Qatar? Simply because Qatar pays enough money for it. And I think it's quite different from the Nazi Munich Olympics, which we did go to, but in retrospect shouldn't have. So I think the message one would take from that is don't go to sporting events in racist, homophobic, repressive countries.
I mean, it's a fair point. Can you just give us, because you're a historian, can you just give us a bit of a backdrop of the Crusades? Because many people think that this was an offensive front on the Islamic world. Was it not the case that this was Christian defence and of course, at some points, defending and taking back the Holy Land?
Absolutely. I mean, the Holy Land has been disputed for millennia. Jerusalem clearly was, central to the Jewish faith, then to the Christian faith, and the Muslims were rather late comers to this. I mean, they captured Jerusalem after defeating the Christians who had already captured it from the Jews. So I don't think the Muslims had any divine right to it. And I think the Crusades were, medieval battles for territory for the Crusader kingdom, which, lasted for a century or more and had quite a strong human rights record. So I don't brand Crusaders as necessarily big bad imperialists, but the whole tendency now is to apologize for anything the West did and to treat everyone else as sort of victims who lacked any agency of their own.
Absolutely. I was going to ask, does this have connotations with supremacist ideologies? But of course, the question is rather, are we putting every other ideology and culture in a supreme pedestal compared to our own?
We are, because any situation now where we see European or Western European forces confronting Eastern or Asian or African forces, we instantly assume that the West was the aggressor, the big bad, dominator of these sort of innocent, wonderful peoples who lived, totally kind of harmonious, peaceful lives. They never fought with each other. This total myth we construct around the pre-Western, pre-colonial societies and demonize the West.
I think it's completely unhelpful, but thank you for that wonderful analogy, Dr. Zaria Masani, historian and author. The Gender Recognition Bill is currently going through the Scottish Parliament. It would allow men to identify as women and vice versa, simply by declaring themselves so. Olivia Utley has been in Edinburgh to find out more.
For a country with a population of just 5.5 million, Scotland seems to be facing more than its fair share of existential crises. While the war over independence rages bitterly on, new battle lines are being drawn up over an issue that could turn out to be even more contentious, a law that would fundamentally alter what it means to be a woman north of the border.
In a move that has sent shockwaves through Holyrood, the Scottish Parliament recently voted in favour of legislation that would allow men to become women and vice versa, merely by declaring themselves so. Under the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, Scotland, which is currently making its way through committee stage, adult Scots would be able to change their legal sex after 3 months of living in their acquired gender, without medical intervention or even a gender dysphoria diagnosis.
The SNP and Greens, the driving force behind the bill, argue that self-ID, as it is known, is necessary to make life easier for trans people, a historically marginalised group.
And that's why we propose to reform the process to make it simpler, more streamlined, more compassionate and less medicalised.
But some Scots are alarmed about the wider impact such a seismic change to the law could have on women's rights.
If you can't define what a woman is, if a woman in Scotland ceases to be somebody who's a female person, then we lose all of our sex-based protections. So I work in health, so my concern is how do we provide maternity services for people who are having babies who aren't female.
Among the most concerned are detransitioners, those who have undergone hormone therapy and surgery in order to make their bodies conform to that of the opposite sex, and who now want to go back to the way they were before.
Sinead Watson is one such person. At the age of 20, she started to identify as a man, binding her breasts and using the name Sean. But at 27, after 4.5 years on testosterone and a double mastectomy, she returned to living as a woman, having realised she had been incorrectly diagnosed as trans.
We know from the CAS review and from the other stories of detransitioners and all the new research and information that's coming out that a lot of this group have comorbid conditions. A lot of them are on the autistic spectrum, a lot of them suffer from internalised misogyny or homophobia, a lot of them have depression and anxiety and other forms of self-hatred like eating disorders. This is a very complex group, and so we cannot demedicalise it. When it comes to something like this, where the inevitable pathway is medical transition that irreversibly changes your body and in many cases can harm you, as cross-sex hormones harmed me, there needs to be some medical onlooking, there needs to be therapy, there needs to be treatment.
The bill suffered a big blow this week when a UN senior official urged Scottish ministers to postpone it. But with overwhelming support from the ruling parties, it's hard to imagine this particular piece of legislation being kicked into the long grass. Ordinary Scots may not know it yet, but it seems genteel Edinburgh is to become the front line for the fiercest of culture wars, that which will decide what it means to be a woman. Olivia Utley, GB News, Edinburgh.
Before we move on, let's have a look at what you've been saying about today's topics. On reparations, Eugene says, the history of Barbados is important here. The overwhelming majority of the native population were killed or displaced by the Spanish or Portuguese. The people transported as slaves have inherited the land. Surely that is reparations. Well, referring to our discussion on the Bible, Mark says, holy cow, for once I actually agree with you, Calvin. Think I need to lie down. It happens to everyone, Mark, don't you worry. And on the persecution of Christians, Tori says, I'm surprised that so few people are highlighting the plight of Christians in Qatar. There's one area called the religious area containing a small number of Christian churches behind a big wall, hidden away by the industrial area, constructed to have no bells, no steeple, no crosses, or any use of the word church visible from outside. That's a good point, Tori, because we're seeing more and more mosques popping up in the UK, more and more calls to prayer in the audible sense. However, on the other end of the spectrum, we're not seeing the same in Qatar. And people will fight for LGBT rights, but will they fight for Christian rights? On our discussion about Jesus, Andy says, I don't really care if Jesus was trans, but I wish he would come back now. Humanity is ruining this place without him. Hear, hear, Andy. Bring it on, we'll try and be ready. A major new study has found that people who look after their grandkids in old age are less likely to suffer from loneliness than those who care for a spouse. The study by researchers from King's College London looked at the findings from 28 countries and found that in 6 out of 7 cases, caring for grandkids was linked to lower feelings of loneliness. Those who simply cared for a spouse, however, were found to have higher levels, often because of partners' health conditions such as dementia. With me now is Robin Hewings, Programme Director of the Campaign to End Loneliness. Good afternoon, Robin. What can we take away from these findings?
Well, I think what we can really take away from this is just that when we have connections in life, then it makes our lives much, much better. And also, I think the other thing I think which really struck home to me about this is that when we create connection by helping other people and by kind of meaningful activities. So I think this fits very well with what we already knew, but I think it's really good news to have it shown in this systematic review.
So why do you think caring for one's grandkids helps so much in reducing these feelings?
Well, I think that when people have kind of purpose in life and are needed, and obviously there's a lot of kind of social interaction in caring for children. So you're caring for your grandchildren, but obviously you'll be taking them to nursery or taking them on play dates. There's lots and lots of kind of really interesting interaction with them in that way. And certainly I know from my own experience, it's often is a great way of keeping in touch with your own children as well, when you're kind of giving all of that support to young children.
Yeah. And what else can we do to help reduce the loneliness that so many feel?
So I think that more work like this, and I think helping us to make loneliness less stigmatised, that it's not people's fault that they're lonely, but also that the things that you can do about loneliness are these things which are about meaningful activities and meaningful ways of coming together. That could be looking after your grandchildren, it could be joining some kind of voluntary group, and what that will be is about what you find interesting, what you'd like to do. And then also I think it's also about making sure that we have the funding for groups, for groups that can help to bring people together. Those kinds of voluntary and community things are a really important part of ways in which we can bring people together. And I imagine kind of music to your ears as well would be that obviously kind of faith for people who are religious can be another really important way of bringing people together. And I know that many faith organisations would say that a lot of their kind of charitable work is very much about tackling loneliness.
Oh, absolutely. Robin, do you think the elderly are forgotten about in our society?
So just in terms of kind of loneliness kind of happens right across the kind of age spectrum. So young people can be lonely, often because there's a lot of change in life when you're young, you're still working out who you are. Whereas when you're older, people are often not so lonely. The group that we need to most worry about in relation to loneliness are not, as it were, kind of healthy 65-year-olds who might have just retired, but people when they become kind of frail or housebound, and particularly people who've been bereaved, that makes a big difference to whether someone is lonely. And they are absolutely a group that need much more support.
Thank you for the work that you do, Robin. That's Robin Hewings, Programme Director of the Campaign to End Loneliness. Now, you know I always like to end on the collect, and it's a wonderful one today because it's the first Sunday of Advent. Almighty God, give us grace that we may cast away the works of darkness and put upon us the armour of light, now in the time of this mortal life in which thy Son, Jesus Christ, came to visit us in great humility, that in the last day, when he shall come again in his glorious majesty to judge both the quick and the dead, we may rise to the life immortal, through him who liveth and reigneth with thee and the Holy Ghost, now and evermore. Amen. You have been watching Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with me, Calvin Robinson. I'll be back with you next Sunday at 2 p.m. Nana Okoye is up next. Before that, here's your latest weather. Deus Vult. God bless.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking wet in the southeast with some showers across western parts. Let's take a look at the details. Southwestern England will see a mix of clear spells and scattered showers this evening. The showers will be mainly across Devon and Cornwall and could be locally heavy. Skies across the southeast of England will remain cloudy, and we can expect some further rain at times, especially for Kent and Sussex. Wales will see a showery end to Sunday, with winds also remaining brisk along the west coast. Eastern areas, though, will see some lengthy dry spells. Sunday, however, will end on a dry note across the Midlands, with the clearest skies across the north and west. A few mist and fog patches may also form as the evening goes on. Northeastern England will also be largely dry, but further west there will be some showers, some of which may be heavy. It will be breezy along Irish Sea coast, but lighter winds elsewhere. Showers will be quite widespread across Scotland this evening, with the showers heavy in places. The far northeast, though, may avoid most of the showers and stay largely dry. Northern Ireland, though, won't be so lucky, with scattered showers continuing here throughout the evening. Winds will be brisk, especially along the coast and over the hills. Overnight, we'll see further showers in the west of the UK, but drier further east with some mist and fog patches forming. And that's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales
and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.